Inside this mysterious forest lives one of the world's oldest tribal civilizations. But what happens when modern humans arrive there to conduct their research? The story begins deep in the African jungle, spreading across a vast landscape. In one of its rivers, a researcher named Gabby travels with her partner. Both are field researchers, assigned to inspect government-installed equipment. Gabby is accompanied by her colleague Tom, who assists her on this mission. They had been working since morning and had just wrapped up their research for the day, but they decided to keep going further. Gabby was equipped with a drone, using its camera to constantly scan the area around them. She was skilled at flying drones and had completed many hidden missions with them before. However, she had no idea that something strange was about to happen. As she flew her drone deeper into the forest, it suddenly stopped working. Something had struck it down. Whatever that unknown figure was, it appeared only for a few seconds before vanishing, and Gabby lost the drone's signal completely. Panic set in as she turned to Tom, asking where her drone went. Tom, busy steering the boat, hadn't noticed anything. Frustrated, Gabby insisted on entering the forest to retrieve her drone, but Tom warned her not to go. These forests were dangerous. No one who ventured too far ever came back. Still, Gabby refused to listen, saying she couldn't leave without her drone. It meant too much to her. Seeing her determination, Tom couldn't say no. He told her he'd check nearby equipment and meet her back soon. Understanding this, Gabby stepped off the boat and headed straight into the forest, while Tom moved in another direction with his gear. Gabby searched everywhere for her drone, unaware that deeper in the forest, strange figures watched her. We soon see several tribal people living there. One of them had Gabby's drone strapped to his back. It was they who had brought the drone down and taken it. These weren't ordinary tribes. They were primitive yet mysterious, communicating not through language but through gestures and psychic signals. Their lifestyle was unlike any other tribe known to man. Soon, we see them disabling cameras installed by the government to monitor wildlife. They smeared substances on the lenses, preventing any recording. Later, when Tom arrived to check the footage, he was shocked to find all the cameras blank, realizing that something intelligent must have done this. Fear began to creep in. He had heard too many eerie stories about this forest. He decided they should leave as soon as possible and go find Gabby. Meanwhile, Gabby still hadn't found her drone and returned to the boat, only to find Tom missing. He had gone into the woods. Suddenly, she heard strange sounds from within the forest and followed them. Out of nowhere, her foot got caught in a wooden trap, the sharp spikes piercing her leg. She screamed in pain, falling to the ground, unable to understand who had set the trap. Then, she sensed movement nearby. Someone or something was running past her. Terrified, she struggled to free herself, calling out for Tom. Somewhere not far away, Tom was also searching for her, unaware of how deep she had gone. The mysterious sounds around Gabby grew louder and closer. Despite her injury, she followed them, limping through the thick brush. Then, something caught her attention, a faint red glow shining in the distance. The strange light seemed to pull her toward it, almost hypnotically. Drawn by the eerie glow, Gabby began walking straight toward the red light. Slowly traveling deeper into the forest, Gabby finally reached the place where the strange red light glowed. But along with that glow, something seemed to float in the air, and before she could react, it entered straight into her body. In the very next moment, Gabby appeared completely hypnotized, as if she had lost control of her own body. What was this unknown extraterrestrial force that had been living in the forest for so many years? The mystery remained unsolved. Meanwhile, Tom continued calling out Gabby's name as he followed her footprints deeper into the woods, trying to find her. But soon, he ran into trouble. He got stuck in a swamp. Struggling desperately, he managed to pull himself free, but then felt a strange presence. Someone, or something, was standing behind a tree. Tom called out, hoping for an answer, but whatever it was remained still for a few seconds. When it finally stepped out, Tom froze in shock. It wasn't an animal, nor was it human. The creature's body was twisted and distorted in unnatural ways. On the other side, Gabby was seen limping toward an old cabin. Her leg still throbbed with pain from the trap, so without thinking twice, she stepped inside and collapsed to the floor, passing out moments later. Tom, meanwhile, was running for his life from that monstrous being. Time passed, and Gabby slowly regained consciousness, but she immediately began vomiting. To her horror, mushrooms were coming out of her mouth. Yet she hadn't eaten anything like that. Just then, two men entered the room, not to harm her, but to help. This was their home, and they had been living in the forest for years. They were a father and son. The father's name was Beryl. Together, they tended to Gabby's wounds, wrapping her leg carefully. Beryl remarked that she had ruined one of their traps meant for catching unknown creatures. Gabby apologized, and Beryl asked what she was doing there. Modern humans never came this deep into the forest. Gabby explained everything. She worked for the government and had come to inspect the monitoring equipment to ensure everything was functioning properly. Beryl then asked who else was with her, and Gabby told him about Tom, her research partner still somewhere in the forest. A strange smile spread across Beryl's face. What he and his son were planning to do next was something beyond Gabby's imagination. Later, they sat together eating raw meat and insects, offering some to Gabby, but she couldn't bring herself to eat it. Ignoring her, Beryl and his son began performing a strange ritualistic prayer. Meanwhile, poor Tom was still trapped in the forest, being hunted by that bizarre creature covered in fungal growths. It looked nothing like a human, its body was full of mushrooms sprouting from every surface. Tom had never seen anything so terrifying in his life and ran as fast as he could. But he didn't realize that the creature's mouth was releasing tiny spores into the air, the same kind Gabby had encountered earlier near the red light. Trying to hide, Tom ducked behind a massive tree, thinking he was safe. But invisible particles were already entering his body through the air. Worse, the tree he hid behind wasn't just any tree, it was alive. Its roots slowly began creeping toward him, brushing against his body. Within moments, Tom's face started to change, mushrooms began sprouting from his skin. Whatever entity ruled this forest was now taking over him. Back at the cabin, Gabby's condition was getting worse. She felt disconnected from her own body. While she slept, something dark began spreading across her wounded leg, the same black substance we saw earlier on the camera lenses. Tiny plants and roots started growing out of her hands and feet, as if the forest itself was slowly claiming her. Gabby suddenly woke up, breathing heavily from the terrifying experience she had just imagined. Her heart pounded as she looked around, realizing it had all been a dream, none of it was real. Everything she had seen was just in her head, not connected to reality. Looking around, she noticed that Beryl and his son were gone. The air inside the cabin was cold, so she started a fire to keep warm. Meanwhile, not far from there, Beryl and his son Steve were out in the forest hunting. They drew their bows and managed to take down an animal. Beryl walked over, smeared the animal's blood on his son's face, and whispered an apology to the fallen creature, believing that taking a life was part of nature's sacred cycle. One species had to depend on another for survival. Carrying the dead animal, they returned to their cabin. It was their food for the night. Back in the forest, Tom's lifeless body was shown, his skin covered with dried herbs and mushrooms. The sight was horrifying. How could something so small and invisible take his life so easily? Those same tiny fungal plants were also growing on Gabby's body earlier in her visions. Even though it was just a dream, why was she the one imagining it? While Gabby rested inside the cabin, she suddenly noticed small plants and roots growing over her body, as if coming to life. The roots began to move, brushing against her skin, almost as if trying to take control of her. Before they could harm her, Beryl and Steve rushed inside just in time. They quickly pulled her away from the creeping vines and wiped them off with special herbs. It seemed as though something in the forest was trying to use these plants to take over human bodies. Gabby had narrowly escaped. Moments later, terrifying sounds echoed from outside the cabin. Gabby's eyes widened in fear. "What's that?" she whispered. Steve explained that those were the forest creatures, blind, deadly beings that hunted by sound. "They can't see," he said, "but they're drawn to any noise." Having lived in the forest for years, Beryl and Steve knew how to avoid them, stay still and silent until the creatures pass. But Gabby, terrified and trembling, accidentally made a sound. Immediately, the monsters outside broke down the door. For the first time, Gabby saw one of them up close. Its face had no eyes, and its entire body was covered in fungus and decayed mushrooms. Its skin was unnaturally flexible, bending and twisting as it moved. The creatures began attacking, drawn by even the slightest motion. Beryl and Steve fought fiercely to protect Gabby, striking down as many as they could. But more sounds came from outside. The number of creatures was increasing fast. The more noise they made, the more monsters arrived. Beryl told Gabby to stand still, not to move at all. But overwhelmed by fear, she began to panic. Steve and Beryl killed several of the creatures, but one managed to break through and charged straight at Gabby. Acting fast, Steve came from behind and slit its throat with his knife. With Beryl's help, they finally defeated the remaining monsters and saved Gabby. Gabby was terrified, shaking uncontrollably. But then Steve noticed something. There was a small patch of the creature's blood on Gabby's shoulder. He quickly rushed to her, stripping away the blood-stained part of her clothing and cleaning her skin thoroughly to prevent infection. Exhausted by everything, Gabby fainted again. After some time, she woke up to see Beryl sitting quietly nearby. Gathering her courage, she asked, "What were those things?" Beryl finally revealed the horrifying truth. "They used to be human," he said. "Years ago, they were people, researchers, hunters, wanderers, just like you. But the strange fungi and plants that grow in this forest, they kill the body and then use it as a host. The fungus controls them, makes them hunt, breathe, and move. These creatures aren't alive, they're the forest's puppets. Beryl's voice turned grave as he continued, those fungi have existed since before humans, buried deep beneath the earth. And now, for some unknown reason, they've begun to rise again. After Beryl finished explaining everything to Gabby, they all went to sleep. That night, Gabby had a strange dream. She found herself standing in the middle of the forest, completely surrounded by darkness and mist. In front of her stood a bizarre-looking tree, unlike anything she had ever seen before. It felt as if the tree was calling out to her, whispering for her to come closer, to step inside it. Suddenly, the same fungal creature from before appeared in her dream and attacked her throat. The attack was so brutal that Gabby couldn't bear the pain. She screamed and jolted awake, gasping for air. Seeing Steve sitting near her made her feel somewhat relieved. Beryl and Steve were both there, watching over her to make sure she was safe. Trying to distract herself, Gabby quickly pulled out her mobile phone and showed it to Steve. She had taken several photos during her mission and began explaining how the smartphone worked. Steve was stunned, he had never seen such a modern device before. A moment later, Beryl entered the room, snatched the phone from Gabby's hands, and threw it to the ground, smashing it. He didn't want any modern technology interfering with their secluded life. In fact, Beryl warned his son to keep his distance from Gabby, suspecting that she might be a modern world monster sent to harm them. Both men then walked out, leaving Gabby alone as she tried to piece her broken phone back together. A while later, something shocking happened. Beryl was seen standing before the same tree that Gabby had seen in her dream. In the center of the massive trunk was a small hollow, and for reasons unknown, Beryl let a few drops of his blood fall into it. The moment his blood touched the tree, strange pores began to open across its surface, and countless tiny mushrooms started to grow, spreading rapidly. It was as if an entirely different world was coming alive inside that tree. Beryl then plucked 2 mushrooms and took them home to eat, one for himself and one for his son. Why he did this remained a mystery. While they might have been eating to survive, there's always danger in consuming wild mushrooms. Many people make fatal mistakes by eating poisonous ones. Experts in the animal kingdom have studied this deeply, and they've identified key ways to tell edible mushrooms apart from toxic ones. For instance, if a mushroom's color is unnaturally bright, anything too vivid other than white, it's most likely poisonous. Toxic mushrooms often have pure white gills underneath their umbrella-shaped caps and release a milky fluid when broken. They may even change color after being damaged. In contrast, edible mushrooms are usually white or light brown, with smooth stems and little to no odor. They commonly grow on soil or wood. Following these guidelines can help one stay safe. Edible varieties include oyster mushrooms, morels, and chanterelles, all of which are safe to eat once correctly identified. But the mushrooms Beryl and Steve were consuming seemed entirely different. Back inside the cabin, Gabby was reading a strange book, one that Beryl himself had written. When Beryl and Steve returned, they found her engrossed in its pages. Instead of reacting angrily, Beryl noticed something alarming. Tiny mushrooms had started growing on Gabby's skin. Panicked, Gabby tried to scrape them off, horrified. Beryl looked at Steve and silently signaled that she was now completely infected. She had to be treated soon, or the infection would worsen. Beryl firmly told Gabby to leave the forest immediately, warning her that no one had ever found a cure for this fungus. But Steve didn't like what his father said. He had grown attached to Gabby in the short time they'd spent together, and the thought of letting her die was unbearable to him. Gabby finally decided to leave because she had no other choice. Beryl kept insisting that if she didn't go soon, they would all die. Helpless and scared, Gabby began packing her things. Steve didn't want her to leave either, but there was no known cure for the fungal virus, staying meant certain death. As Gabby walked through the forest with Beryl, the eerie whispers returned. The voices grew louder and louder until her head started pounding in pain. Suddenly, she noticed several cameras mounted on the trees, remnants of her team's research setup. She picked one up, thinking it might come in handy later. After walking a bit farther with Beryl, Gabby froze in shock. Lying near a tree was the body of her friend Tom. His entire body was covered in mushrooms, his skin pale, and his eyes completely white. Fighting back tears, Gabby knelt beside him and gently touched his hand. To her horror, Tom was still alive. The mushrooms had dried on his body, but he was in unbearable pain. In a broken voice, he begged Gabby to end his suffering, to free him from the agony. But Gabby, sobbing uncontrollably, refused. "There has to be a solution," she said. "There must be an antidote, some cure for this infection." Beryl, standing nearby, pulled out his arrow, preparing to put Tom out of his misery. But Gabby stopped him, determined to save her friend. Beryl reminded her again, just as he had before, that there was no cure for this fungus. Still, he set the arrow down, unwilling to kill without her consent. In a heartbreaking moment, Tom grabbed the arrow himself and thrust it into his own mouth, killing himself instantly. Gabby screamed and cried helplessly as her friend's body went still. The sound of her cries echoed through the forest, drawing the attention of the same fungal creatures. Realizing the danger, Beryl ran for his life, and Gabby followed, having no idea how to navigate the forest on her own. The two ran as fast as they could until they reached their cabin. Steve was shocked and relieved to see Gabby alive, thinking she had already left. Beryl quickly locked all the doors and windows, hoping to keep the creatures out. Fortunately, they had managed to escape far enough, and the creatures didn't find them. Later that night, Gabby woke up in pain. Her legs were covered with fungal growth, mushrooms sprouting from her skin. The infection was spreading faster. Desperate, she confronted Beryl again, asking if there truly was no cure. "If this fungus is everywhere," she said, "then how are you and Steve still alive?" Beryl glared at her but didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed a few supplies and stormed out of the house. Suspicious, Gabby went straight to Steve and asked, "Where does your father go every night?" Steve replied simply, "He goes to pray, like always." But Gabby already had a feeling about what kind of prayer this was. When she pressed him for details, Steve stayed silent. She tried changing the subject, asking about his mother. Steve quietly said, "My mother is in the forest, and she's still alive." But he refused to say more. Gabby began trying to win Steve's trust, hoping to learn the truth about what was happening. She even invited him to come with her to the city, where she promised he'd see incredible technology, devices like the smartphone and more. But Steve refused. "My father says one day everything will end," he told her. "Humans will destroy themselves, and everyone will have to return to the forest. We are the lucky ones because we don't harm nature." Meanwhile, Beryl was once again seen at the same ancient tree, performing his nightly ritual. As always, he let a few drops of blood fall into the hollow and harvested mushrooms that grew from within. He and Steve ate them together. It seemed this strange ritual and the mushrooms were the reason they had survived the infection for so long. Back at the cabin, poor Gabby was getting worse. She could see more mushrooms growing across her legs and body. If nothing was done soon, she would end up just like Tom. Outside, Beryl and Steve returned from their ritual, unaware that Gabby's transformation was accelerating. Steve ran to her and kissed her, sharing the sacred mushroom with her. Gabby realized it was the antidote, and the fungal growths on her skin began to vanish. Though Beryl was furious, Gabby chose to stay in the forest to survive, learning from Steve how to live among them. Curious, Gabby joined a ritual, entering an otherworldly version of the forest where the sacred tree seemed alive. She had a terrifying vision of Steve dead, though in reality, she was unconscious for hours. Haunted by the dream, she later told Beryl, who begged the tree to spare Steve's life. Secretly, Gabby and Steve planned to escape the forest for the city. When Beryl confronted them, Gabby accused him of killing his wife. Heartbroken, she tried leaving alone but soon heard Beryl leading Steve to the mysterious tree demanding a sacrifice. Beryl attacked Steve, but Gabby fought through the forest using her survival skills. Chaos erupted, ending with Steve stabbing his father. Back at the cabin, Gabby discovered the infected tree was actually Steve's mother. The infection spread to Gabby, and she begged Steve to end her before it was too late. Heartbroken, he did. Steve was left standing before the ancient tree, as the story closes on a haunting, unresolved note.